Slavery. For centuries, millions of people were taken from their homelands, transported across the ocean under brutal conditions, and treated as living commodities. This was not just a painful chapter in American history. It stands among humanity's greatest tragedies. The transatlantic slave trade. The forced labor system involving Africans in America began in 1619, when the first group of people from Africa was brought to the British colony of Virginia. Many had been captured during tribal conflicts or forcibly taken, then marched hundreds of kilometers and held in coastal prisons in West Africa. There, they were confined for weeks or months before being loaded onto ships. On board slave ships, people were often chained, crammed into tight, airless spaces with little food or water. The journey took 1 to 2 months, and during this passage, loss of life ranged from 10 to 15%, sometimes reaching 20% during especially dire periods. The primary causes included illnesses like cholera, dysentery, and malaria, as well as injuries from violence or lack of medical care. In the Americas, especially in the southern states of the U.S., enslaved individuals became the backbone of the agricultural economy, which focused on the production of cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane. Over time, the system became codified by law and transformed into an organized socio-economic structure that lasted for over 2 centuries. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, formally ending forced labor in the rebellious southern states. But it wasn't until the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865 that the practice was abolished nationwide. It's estimated that between 12 and 15 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic. More than 1.5 million lives were lost during the journey itself. Millions more died during the process of capture, forced movement, and conflict in Africa. Even after emancipation, African Americans continued to face systemic barriers, racial segregation, economic hardship, disenfranchisement, and limited access to education and employment. The civil rights movement of the 1952nd and 1962nd helped challenge these injustices, leading to landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The legacy of slavery left deep and lasting impacts across continents. In West Africa, the removal of millions caused demographic collapse, fractured societies, and long-term gender imbalances. In the United States, the forced labor system laid the foundation for enduring disparities in wealth, opportunity, and health outcomes. Interestingly, it was doctors aboard these ships, such as John Trotter, who unintentionally contributed to the early development of epidemiology by beginning to record and analyze data related to illness and mortality during the voyages. Today, efforts to preserve and confront this history are gaining momentum through institutions like the Legacy Museum and digital projects that map the slave ship routes. These initiatives serve as vital reminders of a dark past and of the importance of facing history to build a more just future. Slavery is not just history. It is a warning, a reminder that human worth cannot be reduced to a price tag, and that justice delayed is justice denied. Understanding and remembering this chapter is crucial to preventing such tragedies from happening again. Congo invasion. It could be said that King Leopold II's occupation of the Congo stands as one of the darkest chapters in colonial history. A brutal system masked as a mission to civilize that sparked international outrage and exposed the horrors of imperial exploitation. But how did one European monarch come to dominate such a vast region in the heart of Africa without any democratic oversight? Following the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, King Leopold II of Belgium was granted personal control over the Congo Basin through the Berlin Agreement. On paper, he pledged to bring civilization and humanitarian progress to the region. In reality, this was a private colonial enterprise designed to extract the Congo's immense natural resources, especially rubber and ivory, for the king's benefit. To enforce his rule, Leopold established a paramilitary force known as the Force Publique, made up of local conscripts led by European officers, tasked with maintaining order and imposing forced labor across the region. This was not a force that protected the people, but one that existed to suppress and exploit them. At first, exploitation focused on ivory, a luxury commodity highly valued in the West during the late 19th century. But by the 1892, the global demand for rubber soared due to the Industrial Revolution, and Leopold redirected all efforts toward rubber collection. A strict system was enforced, requiring local communities to meet rubber quotas. Those who failed faced violent punishments, including the severing of limbs, which served both as intimidation and a method of accounting for ammunition used in repression. Human lives were valued less than the volume of materials extracted. For a time, these atrocities remained hidden, but not forever. In 1904, British diplomat Roger Casement published an official report documenting widespread abuse, including the taking of family members as leverage to force rubber collection. Journalists and activists like E.D. Morel and George Washington Williams amplified the truth through photographs, testimonies, and first-hand evidence. Global pressure mounted. Research suggests that during Leopold's reign, the Congo's population suffered a dramatic decline. Estimates vary, with between 1.2 million and over 10 million people not surviving by 1908. Causes included forced labor, widespread disease, prolonged food shortages, and the collapse of traditional social structures. In response to public outcry, Leopold reluctantly established an independent commission of inquiry, which confirmed many of the accusations. Several officials were held accountable. One documented case involved the collective execution of 122 Congolese civilians. By 1908, under mounting international and domestic pressure, Leopold II was forced to transfer control of the territory to the Belgian government. The region became a formal colony under the name Belgian Congo. Although some coercive labor policies were reduced, many exploitative practices continued. Still, this marked a turning point, the first time the international community collectively condemned colonial violence as a crime against humanity. The voices of Morel, Casement, and others helped lay the foundations for modern human rights and international law. During Leopold's rule, museums were built in Belgium to display Congolese culture, part of a propaganda campaign promoting colonialism. Today, these museums serve as places for critical reflection, offering a window into a past where absolute power was cloaked in humanitarian rhetoric. Modern research, from census data to oral histories, has helped reclaim the stories of those once silenced, centering the lived experience of native populations long overshadowed by colonial narratives. Some lesser-known historical injustices, such as the forced relocation of mixed-race Congolese children to Europe in the 20th century, have only recently been acknowledged. The Belgian government issued a formal apology and launched compensation programs for the descendants of those affected. Leopold II's occupation of the Congo wasn't just a colonial episode. It's a warning about the dangers of unchecked authority and the human cost when progress is used to disguise greed. Remembering and confronting these tragedies is essential to building a more just world, both now and in the future. Armenia. Among the most devastating humanitarian crises of the 20th century, the Armenian tragedy is widely considered one of the first instances of a systematic campaign of targeted removal carried out by a modern state. In 1915, under the leadership of the Young Turks, the Ottoman Empire initiated a plan to eliminate the Armenian Christian minority in pursuit of a homogeneous Turkish nation defined by ethnicity and religion. The Armenians were accused of disloyalty and suspected of collaborating with Russia, then an enemy of the Ottomans in World War I, though much of the evidence behind these claims was unsubstantiated. The crackdown began in earnest on the 24th of April, 1915, when more than 250 Armenian intellectuals, writers, and community leaders were arrested in Constantinople. This date is widely seen as the start of a broader, organized campaign aimed at removing the Armenian population from eastern Anatolia, a region where they had lived for thousands of years. The operation was driven not only by ethnic motives, but also by religious and political pressures, as non-Muslim minority groups were increasingly seen as threats to national unity. Soon after, mass relocation orders were issued, forcing hundreds of thousands of Armenians to abandon their homes and belongings. They were made to undertake long marches across the deserts of Syria under extreme conditions without adequate food, water, or shelter. Many lost their lives due to hunger, exhaustion, or attacks by accompanying troops or irregular militias. Those who survived the journey were often confined to isolated holding camps, where organized abuses were reported, including the separation of families, forced cultural assimilation, and the appropriation of property. According to international records, between 1 and 1.5 million Armenians did not survive the period between 1915 and 1917. Of these, around 1.2 million are believed to have perished directly due to the state-sponsored removals or while in transit. Hundreds of villages were depopulated, churches and monasteries were taken over or destroyed, and Armenian cultural heritage across Anatolia was nearly erased. Regions once home to vibrant Armenian communities disappeared from both the physical and historical landscape. After the Ottoman Empire collapsed at the end of World War I, the legacy of the tragedy continued to affect generations. Hundreds of thousands of Armenian survivors fled to countries such as the United States, France, and Russia, establishing resilient diaspora communities. The scale and intent of these events later inspired legal scholar Raphael Lemkin to coin the term genocide, which became foundational to the United Nations 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Such Crimes. However, modern-day Turkey continues to reject the classification of these events as genocide, instead framing them as casualties of war and political instability rather than the result of a coordinated state policy. This stance has led to lasting tensions in international diplomacy and legal debate. While many nations and global organizations have formally recognized the events, others have remained neutral for geopolitical reasons. Despite denial in some circles, remembrance and education efforts persist. The Tsitsernakaberd Memorial in Yerevan, Armenia's capital, has served as a central site of remembrance since 1967, and in 1995, it expanded into a research institute dedicated to the study of the Armenian experience during this period. The 24th of April is recognized by Armenian communities worldwide as a day of remembrance. In addition, museums and organizations in countries such as the United States, France, and Israel have undertaken extensive efforts to preserve witness accounts, digitize archives, and raise public awareness. The tragedy that affected the Armenian people stands as one of the earliest warnings about the consequences of extreme nationalism, religious intolerance, and forced assimilation through violence. It highlights the importance of historical recognition not only to honor those affected, but also to build a moral and legal foundation strong enough to prevent future tragedies of this scale.